Hi, I'm Uri. I work at the Apollo team at Meteor Development Group. And joining me is Kamil, he's our top contributor, and we worked together for a while, as he's from here. So randomly, we just decided to do the talk together.
Hi, everyone.
So yeah, hands to your own. So we're going to talk to you today about GraphQL, what it is and why is it important for you as Angular developers, and why we think this is the next generation and the way for you to write APIs to fetch data from your servers. So I just came back from San Francisco, where I talked with Jeff Cross from the Angular team on the same subject. And it was on the first GraphQL summit in the world. And the GraphQL summit was huge and amazing. And the amazing thing about it is that the companies that came to this conference and already are using GraphQL on the wild and in production are a huge scale of companies. Like, it's a lot of companies, and all of them are huge companies that probably most of you know, like Facebook, of course, but GitHub and Shopify and a lot of other large companies. And I don't know if you heard recently, but GitHub in the latest conference announced that their public API is now GraphQL as well. And they've been using GraphQL internally for a while now. And it's important to understand that this thing, GraphQL, that everyone keeps talking about, is not a new thing. It's not like it's not like a hipster technology. Facebook is using it since 2012 in their native mobile apps. And since 2012, they have the same API version. And today, all the apps in Facebook use GraphQL. So I'll let Kamil talk a little bit about what is GraphQL, why do you want to use it, and then I'll take over again.
OK. So first of all, let's take a look at a few problems. The first problems is with the overloading the network. So,
and you're meaning problems over REST APIs?
Yeah, that's true. So with current solutions, we hit let's say we want to fetch a list of something. So we hit the server to fetch the list of IDs. Then we make another request for each element of that list. So we end up with a bunch of round trips. So it's pretty annoying. And the second problem is with data. So when we hit the endpoint, we get a lot of information. And a lot of that information won't be even used in our application. So how can we solve this problem? This is an example. It was, but OK. Thank you a lot. But it's an example from the GraphQL, from the GitHub API. As you can see, it's 1 minute long, so we can skip it, I think.
This is the GitHub API, the REST API, where you call a REST endpoint, and the server decides for you which data it's going to bring. And usually, it brings more data than you're actually using or needs.
Yeah, and about the problem of the overfetched data, we could create a custom endpoint to fetch the data only for a specific use case. But we end up with another problem, which is we end up with a bunch of custom endpoints that we have to maintain. So imagine a situation when we want to change something on the client side. We have to make a change also on the server side. So it's pretty annoying, and it's not pretty good. So what if I told you that there is a solution for it, and it's like those kind of problems have many of companies experience the same problem, and the biggest company we know, it's a Facebook. So they have to come up with a solution, and the solution is called GraphQL, as you all familiar with. So with GraphQL, we changed the approach. So we, as a client, ask exact data we want to from the API. So we get only data we want to, nothing more, nothing less, which is pretty important. And as you can see, here's an example. We can create our own query, and we can fetch, I don't know, name, height, anything we want. And in result, we get the same structure. So it's pretty convenient. And the good thing about GraphQL is that you can avoid using multiple round trips because all the nested queries are fetched inside one request, which is pretty important to know. And yeah, I think, and you're all familiar with TypeScript because you all use, I don't know, maybe not all, but some of you use Angular too. So you get the idea of the typings, of the types. So because the GraphQL is strongly typed, we get the documentation while we writing, while we defining the actual schema of our data. So this way, we can, as a client developer, as a UI developer, we can get the information from the server, what data the API exposes. So, and with this, we get some introspection, which means that while you're writing a query, you get the validation and also autocompletion, which is pretty convenient and pretty increase the developer experience. So it's really good. And let's take a look at a few examples.
OK, thanks, Kamil. I hope I won't screw up the resolution. Oh, OK. So this is the GraphQL.org website. I usually steal all my slides from this website. It's a great website, and you should remember it to go in. And on the website, there's a lot of examples, but they are live. They're actually, we're querying a real database or a real server. So you can see here that I'm querying a hero, and I want its name. So it's pretty self-explanatory. It's not like a hard thing to understand. But now I want to query also the friends of that hero. So first of all, you can see two things here. I started writing something. I get auto-completion. And this is from the API. There's no extra tooling around. This you get if you use GraphQL, and that's it. So you have auto-completion for your API, and you have error checking. I just read an F or whatever I wrote, and it says that this field doesn't exist on the server. So I'm going to ask for friends. And for each friend, I'm going to ask the name. And you see that I fetched here multiple resources. And it's also possible that those resources are coming from different servers and different databases. But I sent one request, and I got one response back exactly in the structure that I want. So this means that I don't need to now collect a few different responses from the server and then to do some kind of like joins on the client. I need to run some logic, get all the information, understand when the information came, which request came before. It's a mess. But with GraphQL, you don't get that. And if I'm adding another field, I will get that field. If I'm removing the field, I won't get field. So I'm getting exactly what I need, and no more, no less. And this is very important. And also, I can be as nested as I want. So I can go here and query the friends of the friends and the name of the friends, and if they are paired in, and I will get the response, one single request, one single response. So this is very powerful. And there's more features to it. Obviously, like we can also send variables, for example. Like I can change the variables here, and I'll get Darth Vader, or back to Luke Skywalker. There's enums, and there's more than that. There's fragments if I want to get deeper, and I won't go into all those things, but the important things is mutations. People ask a lot about GraphQL. Is this just a query language? I can just query information. But no, you can also post information. So it's like, think about it like a post request in REST. So I can change information as well. Let's say I can push a new comment to the server. But the interesting thing here is that if I'm using REST, I push a new comment, and then sometimes from the server I'll get back 1 or true or some kind or null or I don't know what, something that the server decided. In GraphQL, I decide what the response should be. So I'm posting a new comment, and I can request the fields of that new comment, so I can post it into the UI. It's my choice as a client developer. So this was just a simple example. We don't have time today for a lot more of live coding examples, but there's a lot of online talks, both for me and Kamil, doing live coding with Angular and GraphQL, so you can really check out how to use it with Angular. But I want to touch on the major point that we saw of people using this in production and the main benefit that they got from that. So first thing is that, like I said before, Facebook invented that. And Facebook invented it in 2012 in order to move from their HTML-based clients to their iOS native apps. And the idea was that they had existing servers. They didn't have time to now migrate the old servers to the new API. And Google Plus was a thing. So they were afraid of Google Plus, and they understood most of their money is coming from mobile. Today, we forgot about Google Plus, but it's mostly because of this huge transition. They introduced GraphQL, and they released a good, powerful mobile app that now taking over the world, basically, and 87% of the revenue of Facebook is from that app. So the important thing to understand about GraphQL is that it works, it's a middleware. It's not a database language. It's not instead of SQL. You can put it on top of your existing servers today. So people ask me, does GraphQL work with X? Like .NET, Java, REST endpoints, SQL servers, everything. Always the answer is yes. It works with everything, and I'll show you a bit later why. But we're Angular developers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the benefits, more benefits than what we talked before about of using GraphQL on the client. So the basic thing that you can do is just get that query language and send it to the server over HTTP and get the results, and that's fine. That will also, like from the start, will give you a lot of benefits, like you call an HTTP service today. But GraphQL gives us more abilities, especially because we're using component-based applications today. So everyone keeps talking about components, right? Like there are a lot of lectures, Angular now uses components, and there's all kinds of like good best practices. Now, I don't want to like irritate a lot of people, but probably the best practices that you heard about components and fetching data from the server are wrong. And I'll tell you why. So let's go through them. So components, first of all, are nice, right? Like the idea of components is that we write them once, and then we can move them around because they're composable. They encapsulate themselves, and I can reuse them. But then, what happens when you actually fetch data from the server? Let's look at what we do today to do that. So the easiest thing is just to fetch an information. So let's take an example. I have a component here that is it's supposed to display a GitHub issue. So very simple component. I need to fetch that data of the GitHub issue. So I'll just inject the HTTP service, right? We all learned about it. And then I'm calling the REST endpoints, and I'm bringing the data, and I'm displaying it. And that's great. And this is a component, right? We can move it around, right? We can put like 3 of those on our applications. Well, there's a problem. If we're putting all of those in our applications, first of all, each component will send its own request. And it could be, so it means that each component, we have multiple requests, bad for performance. The second thing is that if I had one component that was rendered now and another component was rendered in 5 minutes, 5 minutes later, the data is inconsistent. I see one information here and different information in the other component. So that's not the right solution. So every Angular developer out there will tell you, yeah, use the service. Just put a service on it, right? We're doing it since Angular 1. And we know how to do it. We inject the service. We call that like, I don't know, we have a REST, you know, like our cool encapsulation of that service, and we're getting the data. But there's a problem here. We have, again, we're putting all of our logic in one place. And now, if we're changing something in the issue, in one of the components, we're going to need to change the service, right? But then what happens if there's other components that use the service, but they don't need to change? So all of the idea of components, the idea of a service just basically destroys it. So that's not the solution. So maybe we'll go to a different solution that everyone is offering you. Let's put it on a parent component. OK, so what we're doing, we're using smart and dumb components that everyone likes to say. And we expose the needs of the component in an API. So we just write that the issue needs a title. But then if that component changes, then we need to change the API. And that means that we need to change the component on top of it. And that means that we need to change the component on top of it. So all that encapsulation breaks again. So all of those solutions are bad. So what can we do about it? Well, GraphQL, because it's a very simple query language that is statically analyzable, it's just strings, then it means that we can put those dependencies inside our components, and every time we change one field, we just need to change it inside the component, and that's it. We don't need to change an internal service. We don't need to change other components. And we don't even need to change the server. So this is very powerful, and here is an example. So it's the same component that we have before, and the component renders a title. So we just write our query language on top of it. We just add what we need, an ID and a title. And now we need to add a new field. We decided, the product manager decided that we need to add created at. So we just add it here, and that's it. No service, no nothing, and we'll get it directly into the component. So this is an API that is based on top of components. It's a component-based API. But there's more benefits. So let's talk about performance a bit. So I don't know if there were lectures about it today, but Angular 2 is super fast. The rendering performance of Angular 2 is the fastest today on the market. So that means that the rendering performance is not our bottlenecks anymore. Our bottlenecks is the network. So we can't really afford to send multiple requests to the server. It takes too much time. That's what is stacking for our users. And we can put a spinner, but that's not a good experience. You don't see spinners when you do a like on Facebook, for example. So with GraphQL and a good GraphQL client like Apollo client, you can actually write those dependencies inside our component, and when the render tree is rendered, we'll take all of those queries, we send one request to the server, and we'll get one response from the server. And then when we go to a different route, we do the same. Just one single request, no more than one single request. And this is very, very important. And the third thing that Kamil has talked about before is this is a typed API. So we all use TypeScript, right? Like everyone is talking about how TypeScript is great, but TypeScript is rewriting code in our own apps. We know our own apps, but when we go to the API, we have no idea what we're talking about, what we're going to get. So with typed API, we know exactly what we're going to get. There was a talk before me about the HTTP backend, that we can mock stuff. But the problem there is that even if I mock the backend, and now we agreed with the backend developers that everything works, the backend developers now can change their implementation, and it will break our API. It means that it doesn't matter what we agreed with the backend developers, and if you wrote really a lot of applications with good enterprises, you know that always the backend developers fails. They always break the APIs. With GraphQL, they are bound to the schema. So it won't break, and more than that, you'll get that inside your IDE. You'll get the validation. So you can really do the separation between the client and the server. And by the way, the example here you see is React, but it works with Angular 2, and you can check out, again, our talks to see how it works in real life. And I know we're not server developers, but I want to touch on a few simple, important points on the server. The most important thing is that GraphQL is not instead SQL or anything like it. It's not a data source. It's instead of REST. So you can query any backend. You can put it on your existing servers. You can use it today on whatever. It doesn't matter if you use COBOL. It will be fine. And also, when you write the schema, all of your clients can query the same schema. So we see in large organizations that actually it makes a lot of order when there's a lot of different teams querying the same data services. So this is very powerful, and it also can actually make a lot of sense for your backend developers, because it's in a lot of backends, the GraphQL API actually works as a microservice orchestration level. So you can call, because I'm sending one request from the client and I'll get one response, it doesn't matter the whole request that I'll get, it can go for different microservices, databases, everything. I will get just one request back. And this is just a simple, very simple GraphQL server. So you can see that you can, as a front-end developers, you don't need to be afraid of, even if you would want to do it yourself, it's very simple. And what you can see here that is most important is that each field is actually a function. So like I said before, when you get a query, you can resolve it by a function that can do anything. So you can call an existing REST endpoint, you can call a database, you can call whatever you want. It will always work. And because of the schema, by the way, so I'll skip that, because you have the schema, you can mock it in one single line of code. You can get a real mock. like just in one single line of code. So when we talk about GraphQL, we always say it's for any backend, for any client, and for any language. And this is just like an example from the GraphQL GitHub repository of all the implementations out there in Java, .NET, Python, JavaScript, whatever you need, you will find it there. Also, a lot of questions that I get from people is GraphQL, like, because the client can do whatever they want or query whatever they want, isn't it bad for performance? Well, what's happening here is that we can actually get better performance because the server now doesn't only know that we query a product, but we query specific fields of the product. So we can optimize for specific fields and not just like a random REST endpoint that the server people decided to. So with tools like the one here, you can actually get a better performance from, and much easierly than current REST implementations. So few points that need to be understood, and we already said both of us about, is first, use types for your API. You use types for your code, but it's you writing the code. Use types for the code that you're talking to a different team, or maybe a third-party API or something like that. The second thing is that with GraphQL, you can turn on and off features. So I can add features to my client. I can remove those features to do A/B testing or whatever, and I don't need to talk to the server developers. I will get exactly what I need because GraphQL would take care of it. And the second thing is that the third thing is for backend developers, they just need to provide the schema. They just need to provide the data. They don't need to worry about the crazy client developers that keeps changing features for them. So you, as Angular developers, you don't need to wait for the backend developers anymore, which probably is what you most usually regular to do. So as summary, today we're writing different types of apps. We're writing component-based apps instead of page-based app. We have super fast rendering with Angular 2. And we, as for a long time, we've been trying to separate the client development and the server development. So we need an API that is built for this type of new types of APIs. So a component-based API where we can put the queries inside our components, a single request per render. We can't afford more. We can't afford multiple trips, and we can't afford the time and the development time to do joins on the client without tools that we really can do, right? Like we're getting multiple requests, and now we're trying to do for loops and like trying to figure out this data structure that we want. Now we just visualize it, and we get it back. And the GraphQL first approach, which means that we agree on a schema, and there's no way for any of the sides to break it. We can just start developing, and by the protocol itself, you can't break it. With REST, you can, and probably most of you have suffered from it. So just to check it all out, first of all, you can check Kamil's talks and my talks online. Check out Apollo Client. It's our client for using Graph. This is how you can use GraphQL with Angular. We have implementations for React, React Native, iOS, Angular, of course, Angular 1 as well. It's very important to understand that you can use this thing with Angular 1, whether you use components or not. And yeah, thank you very much.